I'm originally from Indonesia. According to Google, it's supposedly the world's largest Muslim
No,
population.
it is, yeah.
One flight away, in the United States, I become the minority of minority.
Yeah.
The majority, or if I'm not mistaken, are Arabs, Desis, and Black Muslims in the United States.
Yeah.
Now, what about this culture in finding a potential spouse where they're of Arabic descent or Desi descent, but where their parents are basically ingraining in them you're supposed to marry from the same race? Something that's very cultural, or usually they give reasons, they don't know the culture, they don't speak the same language, all those very human stuff. I mean, granted that if the woman actually wanted to marry from the same culture or race, it's okay because usually people have affinity for familiar faces, familiar language and
Yeah.
sounds and whatnot. But what if, say, a family that has a children and a daughter, I mean a boy and a daughter, the parents gives the okay for the guy, the Muslim guy, to marry, say, a Hispanic or a white woman or a black woman, but when it comes to their daughters, no, you have to marry to a Muslim guy from the same race, or at least, like white guy could be a pass. They'll give a pass to a white guy in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, this is a sad type of racism that we. I mean, this is sort of it's a reverse racism that we came from colonialism. All colonized people, by the way, all colonized people, they have developed a racial complex where you uh, look up to the white race as the master race, and whether you say it like that or not. So if your daughter, if you're, I mean, this is the same. If you're Egyptian, you want your daughter to marry an Egyptian, and you say no to Indonesians, no to Indians, no to Malaysians, no. But if a white man comes, oh, okay, that's something that looks good, and you find it so. Any Arab that has a spouse that's a white, they go around like they've won the lottery. They go around like uh, carrying her on their arm or carrying him on their arm because they're white. Um, while if their wife is Indian or Filipino or black, they go around like it's not as and I'm all too familiar with the culture of bragging about, oh yeah, I might have, I married a blonde. It's
I did.
yeah. So you're one of them. Yeah, you're one of them. But this is unfortunate. This is a phenomenon of colonialism. Since colonialism, because the colonizer, the master race, where and it is so endemic that even among in the Gulf, that you see the way people treat a spouse from Indonesia or Malaysia or Philippines or and so on, but and then the way they'll have a very different attitude to a spouse that's from the superior races. All I can say is that that's completely inconsistent with every ounce of Islam. I mean, I understand the cultural comfort, but keep this in mind. When the Prophet ﷺ went out of his way to encourage the companions to marry outside their tribes, and when with the spread of the companions, they all married one. If they made the point that what we call the tabi'in, the successors, the children of the companions, to marry interracially, and to make that a way of encouraging people to make the bond of marriage their faith rather than their culture. Now, I can tell you from experience that when the bond of your marriage is faith, it is stronger than anything, and it it makes all cultural differences seem petty and insignificant. The part that is completely inconsistent with Islamic ethics is ethnic, ethnically privileged marriage or any nuance of racism. Because from the very beginning, we learn that from the very beginning, and this is long before we have all the stuff about racism, and I mean, long before the European experience, in other words, that what was the when it came to issues of ethnicity and race, what was the essential message of the Prophet ﷺ? I mean, from the very beginning, he said that people are as equal as the teeth of a comb. There is no difference between an Arab and a Persian, except by their piety. I mean, the Prophet from the very beginning fought the claim of ethnocentrism, which was known to Arabs because they knew an Arab and they knew a Persian and they knew a Turk and they knew they had ethnic differences. And Islam, from the time of the Prophet, pioneered the fight to dissolve or to rebel against ethnicities. And the Prophet ﷺ called ethnocentrism the call of jahiliyyah, the call of ignorance, the call of and jahiliyyah is not just the word equal to ignorance, but it is the word equal to godlessness, being lost in an ungodly world. Now, and that is also why when we have various rebellions, such as the Abbasid rebellion against the claim of Arab racism by the Umayyads, the call of the Abbasids against Arab racism was that we want to rebel against the Jahiliyyah of Arab racism. I mean, they were completely invoking the authority of the Prophet that Islam, if nothing else, it rebelled against people giving any sense of worth according to the color of your skin or your ethnicity. That's a very powerful momentum, and again, among Black Americans, it was very powerfully in many people reclaiming or people converting to Islam, because when they went to Islamic theology, they saw this vehemence in rejecting tribalism and rejecting ethnocentrism and racism. It saddens me when you see, Arnold Toynbee, he was a British historian. He was a sort of one of these British historians that, on the one hand, justified colonialism, but on the other hand, knew that colonialism was doing something really bad. And so he has a very interesting part where he talks about, he says that European colonialism has a disease that's very different from other forms of colonialism exercised by other people in history. And he says that it's the disease of racism. And then he says, and he was particularly focusing on French and British colonialism. And he says one of the things that British and French colonialism do is not that we only infect people with our language and the destruction of their native language, but we are also infect them with the virus of racism. And it is very true. It's the first time that I see Muslim theologians not talk about rebelling against racism in all its form is unfortunately again among Wahhabi jurists. And the reason is because they were always attached to the state, and the state didn't want them to talk about racism because they didn't want laborers who didn't have Saudi citizenship to start demanding their rights. So it told, because they're about 40, they're actually 60% of the population. So it told the jurists to keep that part out of their books on theology, and they did. Saudi Jews. And so it's rather shocking when I go to a mosque and I will hear khutbahs, and I will never hear khutbah about racism in like the King Fahd Mosque. That's as essential to Islam as the idea of liberation by through obedience, by that you submit to God, but you submit to no other. Um, my advice to someone like you is marry on the base of your aqidah, your faith. If you find a woman that sees eye to eye on matters of your desire to build a relationship with Allah. I have a lecture series called Building a Partnership with Allah. And I would really, and actually I tell couples who come and they want to marry, start your marriage by listening to them.
Is it available on YouTube under Scholar of the House?
It's on the website.
It's on the website?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because if you build it on something like that, then all these differences seem silly. And I'll tell you one of the things that my teachers taught me is say if it matters to you in your marriage what type of food you eat, and what is available for dinner, then you have to work on your relationship with Allah because you're too attached to food. And so we never talk about what we, it's just, Grace always tells me, what do you want to eat? I say, whatever. Food. It cannot be an issue. It cannot be an issue. I mean, it's something you have to work on because we are weak as human beings and we have huge egos. But a huge part of marriage is disciplining your ego. So you don't. A lot of people who get married, they actually don't fall in love with their spouse. They are in love with themselves, so they project themselves onto their spouse. So it's with their desires. They just make their desires. They just assume that their spouse is what they want. So and they never get a chance to actually know the person they're with. They simply know what they want to know about the other person, but they don't get to know the person they're with. And that's the beauty of faith. It humbles you. It tells you you are so important because you are the breath of God, but you are never so important as to justify your injustice against another. Your emotions in the sight of God can never count more than the other, or just because you feel like something. That's never a good cause in the eyes of God, because it must be weighed out and balanced against what the other feels. And if that is the basis, the premise for your marriage, then saying things like I feel this and I feel that, and then not listening to the other really feels like you're offending God. You feel embarrassed, and it's as if God enters into the marriage. And at least in what I've seen, is that when God enters into a marriage, these ethnic and cultural differences evaporate. The problem, of course, is that when people marry, God is very superficially into their marriage, and then ethnic and cultural differences become very important because what you wear, what you eat, what what language your friends speak becomes so important. It becomes make it or break it issues.
Just
بارك الله فيك.